I have a theory about abuse making you dumb, and I'm basing this on my own personal experience. And what's inspiring it is knowing that I am not dumb, meaning, if you've heard me talk, then you probably have noticed that I'm not dumb, that I'm actually pretty smart. And yet, if you saw me, which some of you have, a few years ago, when I got wrapped up in all that Sphere Being Alliance stuff, I seemed relatively dumb in certain aspects. And the reason for that is because at that point, I was living in an abusive situation. And looking back at my life, I can see a pattern of when I was living in abusive situations, I was much dumber than I was when I wasn't. So, why is that? And I'm basing this on my situation, my own personal experience, but I would bet $1,000 that I'm not the only one, and it's probably pretty common. And so we know that abuse affects the brain. It shrinks the brain. They say that it shrinks certain parts of the brain, and I haven't looked too deep into this, but they say it shrinks certain parts of the brain involving self reflection and emotions, something like that. But I'm sure it probably has also an effect on whatever parts of the brain affect your cognitive abilities, right? Your ability for rational thought. And so, putting that aside, putting the brain stuff aside, what's actually going on? And I think this is all just my theory, okay? I think that it's based a lot on being gaslighted out of your own ability to think properly or to trust yourself, or out of your own confidence, out of your ability to think rationally. So when you're being abused and you're being gaslighted, at first you may have the ability to have rational thoughts. So you're like, the ice is cold, and you know that ice is cold. But if your gaslighter says, oh, no, no, it's not always cold, sometimes ice is warm, you may think that's ridiculous at first, but if you hear it often enough, or if enough people validate that, like if you're in a room full of people who are also like, no, 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 ice is warm sometimes, you may lose trust in your own perception of reality and start thinking, maybe I'm wrong, maybe ice is warm sometimes. And once that happens, it's not just about your ability to know if ice is warm or cold. It's about your overall perception of reality. And you start to doubt yourself in all your perception of reality and everything that you know. So once you have that break where you start to doubt yourself, then your abusers have the ability, have a much easier time programming beliefs into your brain, because you stop trusting your own perception of reality and your ability to discern what's true or not, and you start to believe this authority figure. And so being raised like that, or being going through that, not only do you start having trouble discerning reality, and you start believing your abuser more, but that inability to discern reality, it it gets extended to other parts of life. So then you might go off and hear someone else who's confidently telling you something ridiculous, and because you're used to being manipulated into believing the most confident person in the room, that you start to believe people who are lying to you because that's what you've been trained to do, because you've lost your ability to trust yourself and your perception of reality. So you rely on a person of authority and confidence to tell you what is real and what is true. Yeah, so I've noticed that in my own personal experience, because watching some of my older videos, it's a bit cringe, because I'm just like, why would I just assume that? Why would I go in that direction? Why would I make that assumption? Why would I come to that conclusion? Where was the discernment? Where was the nuance? Where were the questions? Why didn't I ask more questions? Why didn't I do more research? Why wasn't I open to different possibilities? And I think the reason was, I know the reason was because I was being bullied out of my own ability to ask questions. And being trained to believe stupidity unquestioningly. And so leaving the abusive situation that I was living in, and then being able to complete my self-work, because I had been doing self-work on myself for many years, but then I obviously had more stuff to deal with. I mean, it's an endless thing, but maybe I'll touch on that in a second. I don't want to derail the idea that I'm getting to here. But once I left that abusive situation, I started completing my self-work in that regard, I started to get back to my ability of trusting myself and building confidence and being able to tell people that disagreed with me to F off, because I did the research and I asked the questions, and I had nuance, like I considered the nuances and everything. And so I knew that I was right, and I had the confidence that I was right. And then when people disagreed with me, I told them that I could tell them that I don't care, because I trusted myself. I learned to trust myself again. And when I started to trust myself again and become more reliant on myself for truth instead of reliant on some authority figure or whoever the most confident person in the room was, then it was as if my IQ went up, because it wasn't like my IQ. It wasn't like I wasn't intelligent in the first place. I was intelligent, but it was buried beneath all the other crap because it was suppressed. My intelligence was suppressed because my ability to think and ask questions was suppressed. So breaking free of the abuse and doing the self-work gave me the opportunity to free that part of myself. And that is what raised my IQ, or, for this theory, you know what I mean? Like I got smarter, or I started to realize that intelligence. I started to express that intelligence again. And it comes down to asking questions and having the ability to possibly be, I want to say to possibly be wrong, but also when you're being abused, you're also told you're always wrong, kind of thing. So, but maybe that's the issue, is that you're told that you're wrong all the time, even when you're right, which is probably most of the time, because you're being gaslighted. And so there's this shame associated with the possibility of being wrong. And so that's why you become afraid to explore your own thoughts, because you might be wrong, and there's that shame associated with it. So once you heal that shame, and you gain that strength back to take that chance on yourself again to potentially be wrong. And there's no, if I say something and I'm wrong, if I am not overwhelmed by shame, I can just be like, oh, I guess I was wrong. Now moving on. But if I've been abused into being ashamed of being wrong, that moment of realizing that I may have been wrong or that I was wrong is so incredibly shameful that it's debilitating, and it like knocks you back into your shell, and then you don't, it's like being afraid to think for yourself. Afraid to think for yourself. There's just a lot of levels to it. So I do believe that being abused, and this is also, you can notice these things in people who have been programmed or brainwashed by cults or cult organizations, because it's the same thing. They're being manipulated and brainwashed, programmed by a narcissist. Cult leaders are always a narcissist. And so you have this charismatic, confident-seeming narcissist who is gaslighting people out of their own ability to think and shaming them for thinking on their own and asking questions. And so it is the same thing. So I truly believe that people who are in abusive situations and or cults will come across dumber than they truly are, as did I, because their ability to think for themselves has been manipulated out of them, essentially, has been suppressed. But the key is, once you get out of that and you heal and you get your ability to think back, then your IQ shoots up. So yeah, that's my thoughts on that. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Thank you for listening. Bye.